travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your gracious host and guide along the way. As I am recording this, I have just returned back from the international cheese capital of the world, the town of Gouda, or Gouda, as they sort of say in Holland. That celebrates its 750th anniversary. And it's a beautiful town. I was there working with a performance group of very funny, musically inclined guys called the Ashton Brothers, and it was great. I met up. It's funny sometimes how these things happen, and I met this magician when I was performing at the Masters of Magic convention earlier this year in Italy, and there I was sitting in my dressing room, and a guy pops his head through the door, which was an act, a man with an incredible manipulation act. His name is Nick Tackens, and he popped his head through the door and said he'd just been speaking to a guy on the phone who had been talking about me and had asked him whether he knew me, and he said he didn't know me, but that he was sitting like a meter away in the dressing room next door, literally next door, and he popped his head in and we chatted and got along real good. And then later on, this man Friezo, which is one of the Ashton brothers, called me and invited me to come, and we've just done 4 shows together, and it was great because we also had a bit of a creation, and I got to be part of some other numbers, playing a wild beast in a crazy beast taming act, and I got these the flavor of the Circus Nemo shows with the craziness of the humor, and got along really well with those guys. And then went back home again, had a very long stopover at Oslo airport, and I don't know how you do it when you're traveling, but with all the traveling that I do, I take these days of travel as work days. So I write, and I had actually there's the longest stopover I've ever had here now, and which was like 7 hours or something like that. So I spent a considerable amount of time writing and preparing as we are drawing towards the end of the book, The Way of the Showman, philosophy on showmanship in outline, which is what we are sort of coming towards the end of here. We are now on the 31st episode, where we are talking about the chapters from that book, and we're getting into the final of the 4 elements of showmanship. We have looked at the showman, we have looked at the audience, we have looked at the relationship between the two, we have looked at attention in the last few episodes, and now we're moving into the final of these sections before we're going to round it up, and that is into the world of shows. And I was there, so yeah, that's what we're moving on to. But then after I'd been sitting at the airport and writing all that, and then I came home, and next day when I just had these reflections of really feeling like I had come home, whereas I was sitting outside and my daughter has got her friends over who live really nearby. I'm sitting there looking at the sea, and the kids are squealing and having the best time, where one kid arrives and then 2 other kids arrive, and then by the time they're all hanging out, and there's like 5 kids running around in the house, and it just struck me like it really has it feels like after all this time that we've finally landed, and that now I'm really coming home, that this place here in Norway is starting to really feel like home again. And on that note, it's the big reveal is that I have now bought a house together with my wife. We have bought a house here in Haugesund, Norway, so we are going to be here for a substantial amount of time. So that's all exciting for me. But let's not dawdle anymore. Let's get into the meat of today's episode, where we are moving into the realm of shows, We've looked at the showman, we have looked at the audience, we have looked at the attention which can create it, and now we're looking at the fruition, what emerges when showman and audience meets in joint attention, namely the phenomena that we call shows. So, shows. This is the final of the 4 elements of showmanship, and it is the phenomena of shows. And a showman does shows. Shows are something active, something which happens, and it is arguably the thing upon which all the other aspects of showmanship turns. It's the defining thing, if you will, at least as it's commonly understood. You don't call someone who never does shows a showman. So to most people, how can you prove that you are a showman? Well, you do a show. So although, as we have discovered along the way, through this book and through all this season of shows, the process of showmanship can be seen to include many more practitioners than the performers of circus tricks and unusual skills. We have seen that the process of showmanship can be fruitfully applied, at the very least, as a powerful metaphor or analog to all aspects of human communication. Politicians, teachers, salespeople, painters, writers, and filmmakers can all be understood through the lens of showmanship. Even though this is not something that most people think of. They think of a show, can't necessarily describe what it is, but they know what a show is when they see it. And we're expanding that notion of what a show can be here. So the material and a medium that a painter or a politician or a teacher, how they present it, that varies, but the principles remain the same. That's something that we've learned in we could call this the esoteric knowledge that most people don't have, or ways to see it that most people don't share. So from all of our explorations, we've gained an understanding that what us show folks participate in with our seemingly frivolous craft actually lies at the heart of the human condition. We communicate, and at that we have boiled showmanship so far down that we find the essence being this point of communication. We're going to look at that in the show here, because that show is then the showing and telling. It's the core of what this is. So in this chapter we'll start looking at a little closer at what shows are and how they could be said to bring forth a new and deeply human dimension to existence. We will look at that, how human it is. That'll be coming up in the next episode. But from all of this, we will see how this new added dimension of shows could be thought of as the showman's second home. We'll probably look at that in an episode after that. Or we're going to look at the sort of archetypal character of the showman with capital S, how he exists in this dimension. Second home, which only emerges in the area of interest that we spoke about before, and how this how if we lose access to this place, it's like what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, which to all intents and purposes are completely disappeared from Norway. So it's like this vague memory now, but when we lost access to it, it's like it made us homeless. So we'll look at that in a couple of episodes from now, and we will look at how shows are like dialogues. This dialogue, of course, we've spoken about that before as well, but we'll delve deeper into it and see how that fundamental structure then gets to the heart of what showmanship is. And then we will look at from there to try to go like one step deeper to try to understand what it is, some of the features of what dialogues or what shows what's even more fundamental than showing. What can we say about it? And we will discover that the things that I boil it down to here in as we wrap up this season 2 of The Way of the Showman, we will discover that this is connections, it's connectivity, relations, and it is play. So we will look at play as we go, and this will be the final explorations of this journey along the way. So, to start this off, I thought we would go a little bit poetic. So, let's look at the show, and let's look at it through the lens of creation stories. And then I'm thinking creation stories, not just like an origin story, like in a superhero Marvel kind of DC Marvel universe kind of thing, but as in creation story, as in the origins in mythology. So we will look at mixing it together with the mythology that I know the best or deepest, which is the Norse mythology. So the show, a creation story. When a showman performs on a market square, he creates a universe. When a showman, which is related to the showman, or when a showman performs on a market square, he creates a universe. This, of course, comes from the Illuminated Showman's Manifesto. So this will be the springboard or the trailhead from which our explorations of today will go. So let's put our mythical glasses on for a moment, and let me paint you an expanded picture of the creating a universe line from the Illuminated Showman's Manifesto, where the universe he creates is a show. The show is again the opening up of a kind of wormhole in experience, an experience different from everyday experience. It's afforded by the experiential breakdown of space and time, where chronos, time, is turned into chaotic time, as we spoke about, and it's been then turned into a uniquely human way to experience reality, where everything said, done, or experienced can be seen to point beyond itself, whilst simultaneously being all there is. In this symbolic realm, everything becomes interconnected as you participate in the creation of this new dimension. I'd just like to note that the following, what we're doing here, should be read or understood in the spirit, read or participated in the spirit of Werner Herzog's ecstatic truth, rather than the sort of accountant's truth. We have to look at this in the way that you listen to a poem, perhaps. So, when a showman takes his place on the market space, at first there is nothing. It is a space without form, without cohesion, a void where swirling chaos reigns. People mill about buying essentials and non-essentials, window shopping. Some are tourists, some are happy, some bored, some have missions, others are lost. There is no cohesive direction. And like in many other origin myths and creation stories, there is not nothing in the void. There is not nothing in the void. Our metaphorical void of the market square has a lot of motion. The not nothing in the void is something, and that something is, at least in part, motion. Exactly when and from where the showman appears, no record survives, but an illuminated showman emerges into this movement of formless chaos, and within the motion he is still, the unmoving mover. This is the first polarity, stillness and movement. The illuminates stillness radiates and exudes a pull. There is gravity in the stillness, in the radiating attraction, gaze, direction, and a will to move others. The gravity of the showman is a strange attractor, drawing organization and direction from random movements. From the swirling of motion, order emerges. entities, beings, bodies gather, no longer just part of a flow. Gravity catches them. Attention is grabbed, interest piqued. Bodies and beings are pulled in, slowly, gathering orderly around him, and the smallest amount of something in the swirling nothing changes everything. The smallest amount of something, of direction in the swirling nothing changes everything. One thing and another, something and something else. Form arises in the meeting between the polarities of stillness and movement. One and an other, another, an other is the starting point for a third space in the form of the meeting between two. A dialogic extra dimension. As crowd gathers around the showman, direction is embedded in the meeting. As crowd gathers around the showman, direction is embedded in the meeting. The showman radiates his gaze, he sees and is seen. The gravity of his whole self is loud like the sun in the void. A showman's creation of a space for showtime invites form in the chaos of people milling about and brings parts together into a new and temporary whole, a new form of being. Now this simple symbolic setup has deep elements reminiscent of the first polarity, which lies at the root of the creation of cosmos in the mythology of my Norwegian ancestors. I don't use the word myth to mean stories from the deep past, which today are largely irrelevant. Often these days myth is used as synonymous with falsehoods. To me, myths are stories or structures which reveals important patterns that are of perennial value. They're always, year after year, time and time again, as culture moves on and as one civilization is born and disappears, these patterns continue to be of value and importance to human beings. And even though each culture's myth contains elements which clearly shows where it originated, like the Norse gods had spears, war hammers and ships. But so the difference to a story about Vikings, like it's not just a story about Vikings, the myths continues to be relevant and to contain wisdom. I think that in this way myths are maps of relations, of patterns and processes, which when brought into awareness and reflected on allows us to forge deep and deeper connections and insights that are of value right now in the modern age or at any time. That's why the myths don't quite go away. We continue to look at them and continue to find more. And like poems, they just can be like all the great works of art and literature which you can see again and again, and they can always be reinterpreted because there seem to be like fertile soil from which any thought seed you might plant into it, you might get all kinds of beautiful connections to sprout from it. If you approach those in a playful manner, then you get all kinds of relationships out of it. So myths aren't just stories of value for the people who first shared them. I think they continue to be valuable sources of meaning making throughout the ages. And the Norse myths, their creation myth, there tells us that before there was soil or sky or grass, there was only the gaping abyss of Ginnungagap, which was a great formless nothing, with no directions, no up, no down, nor back and front. Yet this great dark chaos was not completely uniform. Not everywhere was the same. So in the void, I guess there was not nothing in the void. There was in this, the void of Ginnungagap, there was a difference in temperature. In the silent emptiness emerged, or perhaps it had been there from before time, a polarity of hot and cold. The homeland of elemental fire was called Muspelheim, and the homeland of elemental ice was called Niflheim. Heim meaning home. Niflheim, Muspelheim, fire and ice were the two polarities in the nothingness of the void. And in the meeting of hot and cold, the ice melts to water, and in the moist, steamy fusion of where these two meet, the fruits of its dialogue, if you will, the first being emerges in this meeting of the two. And the first being is the giant, and his name is Ymir. And the corpse of Ymir, which, just to not go too deeply into all the pictures of it here, just that the corpse, he gets killed, so obviously there's a few more beings that emerges from here, but well, let's just skip past that to look at that this Ymir, the first being that comes out, when he eventually is killed, and then his corpse becomes the world, and his blood becomes the oceans, his brain becomes clouds, and his skull becomes the sky. So that's a pretty large being, this. Just if its skull is the sky now, like the dome of the heavens. And in the meeting of the two polarities, at the intersection between, at the meeting point, at the area of interest, as two becomes three, a three-dimensional being, as in the two, the hot and the cold, as they meet, a third thing arrives, and this is a three-dimensional living being that emerges along the polarities, the midway of these polarities, but the hot and cold, the moist, where it all mixes together is the midway. And this creation then becomes the multitude of everything else in the universe. The brain becomes the clouds, and for whatever, his hair becomes the forests, and all this. So the dialogue of duality, and the result of that dialogue is the key to unlock the dimensions of the adjacent possible, and the adjacent possible is then everything we know in existence. So I think, looking at that, the picture of Ymir that emerges in the three, I think we can just as easily picture our showman and audience as the hot and cold in this one. This is a structure that I easily see, because I think of everything through the lens of showmanship, and I see then you have a polarity of hot and cold rather than the polarity of hot and cold, and there we have a movement and stillness, or we have that we described in our beginning. So in fact, it isn't much of a stretch to think of fire as movement, I'd say, and frozen ice as stillness. So the overall symbolic pattern is the same. Form appears as a crowd gathers around the illuminated showman, and we get a new level of form and order. And from this first meeting comes more and more form. Ymir's body becomes the elements of the world defined by likeness of form. So the brain becomes clouds and blood becomes ocean, etc. And for the showman, the form of the show, with the others facing him, standing in rows so all can see, is also shaped according to the dictates of the human form. Now, given that we all have eyes, nose, mouth, when these things are placed at what we think of as the front of our heads, our face, we all naturally place this part of ourselves facing towards the showman, and he, again, orients his face the other way. Or is it the other way around? Who orients themselves in which direction? Well, our front and back is a further polarity, another organizing feature. So there is now more direction in the formless void. Where there was nothing, there is now the potential, the endless potential for everything. So this is not to say that there is a sort of straight analog, or that this surely was what the ancient Norwegians or Nordic people who lived up here in this icy cold age, that no doubt it was a rough time to live in, that this is what they were thinking about. But the idea with myths and how I see them is that these structures in there, they're so primal, and especially then when you go to like the origin myths or whatever of something like that, why is there something instead of nothing, like the deepest questions of philosophy, and they're all coming through in the myths. And some people like Owen Barfield and Steiner and all these, they kind of think that in the dawn of time, or the origin of human consciousness, that we had a slightly different kind of consciousness, that we saw the world more in pictures before language became as primary as it is, and before the thinking had developed as far as it has now. If you look at the history of evolution as the history of thought, as to how thought had found its expression in us, or had become part of us, that before that people had a more kind of picture consciousness, and that these pictures that we get in the myths can be thought about, the specificity of the thoughts that we have when we think about this. And I look at, it could fit also on the myth of the showman on the market square or whatever, that the pictures are always so rich. The pictures tells 1,000 words, and then from each angle you look at the picture, another 1,000 words will emerge. So I urge you to continue exploring how this is, or if you yourself, or not if, like you have your own things that you care about and that you're interested in, try and look at those through this mythic lens of showmanship, and see what kind of patterns you will discover, and see how it relates to those things that you care about, be it a religious thing or a spiritual thing or a poetic thing, or just a direct thing of passion or interest for some social cause or whatever. And I'm sure you'll find something potent in there. So that's all we wanted to say as the introduction towards shows. It starts mythic, and we'll get a little more concrete as we go, as we try to put some pins in shows to understand bits about them. Because of course, whenever we talk about a phenomenon like this, all we can do is to kind of pin it down, look at it from one angle, and then we let it go again, and it's because it becomes complex again, and you can see something completely different. So there we go. All right. Never had the Vikings imagined that their origin sacred story would be used for something as frivolous as understanding showmanship. But as we shall see as we go on with the further seasons of this podcast, I was walking around in Gouda, in the international cheese capital of the world, and I saw a large church, I don't know how old it was, but hundreds of years old, beautiful stone church, firm, standing in the heart of a big square where there was a cheese market. And next to the church, as part of the 750-year celebrations, there was a carnival set up, beautiful old carousels and a beautiful big Ferris wheel that stood next to it. And perhaps most people look at it and they go, "Oh, look how firm the church is standing there with its stones, and it's the one aspect of human culture or human behavior or human nature is the church." And then next to it, this frivolous thing where you have something very serious, and then you have something very frivolous or very fleeting, the carnival. But as I am boiling away in my head as to where we will go in the next season of shows, as we take on a new project, we will look at the making meaning, and to be able to make meaning, we will look also at the origins of the showman. And I see the origins of it including both the sacred and the profane, So both the entertainment and the fleeting there, and also the spiritual aspects of it. So we will delve into that next season. But it's already finding its way onto pages and pages of my notebooks. So until next time, I would love it if you could tell somebody about the Way of the Showman. Share it on social media. Share one of the episodes, perhaps, on social media, and maybe write a review. That would be very excellent. You can support me and the work that we do here on this podcast by buying me a coffee, as it's called. It's at buymeacoffee.com/Captain Frodo. Any donation would be greatly appreciated. So, without further ado, I believe we have come to the very end, and all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.